I'm Deborah Uroda, and today we have Pat Barrett in the studio with us today from Tafoya Barrett & Associates, and we're going to talk about what happens if you're appointed executor or administrator of someone's estate after they die. What, in a nutshell, does an executor or an administrator do?
Well, Deb, to kind of take the 1,000-foot view, it seems pretty simple and pretty straightforward on its face, but basically the executor or administrator is charged with locating, finding, and identifying all of the assets of the estate, and then paying all the debts of the estate, and then ultimately distributing out to the beneficiaries the remaining residual of the estate after all of the debts had been paid.
And that's not that easy, I know, from experience.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, we often find that even in the simplest states, it could take as long as 2 years to actually administer the estate and get the assets distributed out to the beneficiaries.
And what's the first thing you got to do?
First thing you need to do is to apply for a federal employer identification number or an EIN number with the IRS for the estate. And then, you could utilize that ID number to then go open up bank accounts.
Now, you want to open up a separate bank account for the disposition of the estate, is that correct?
That is correct.
And why is that?
Because once an individual passes away, obviously, their life has ended. And then when they pass away, the estate and or a trust may kick in, depending on the estate plan that's put into place. Becomes a legal entity at that point in time that mainly takes custody and ownership of all of the decedent's assets at that time.
So if if the estate has one more paycheck, for example, it'd go into that new bank account and you'd write checks to pay the bills, that sort of thing.
Correct. And then, if the decedent happens to have some money in a savings account and or even a checking account, their investment accounts, they all have to be moved over into accounts under the name and ID number of the estate.
And I understand that you have to file taxes for the individual at the very end. The government will get you every time, even at death.
Yeah, that is correct. The executor and or administrator of the estate, again, is responsible for filing the final individual income tax return for the decedent. And if the decedent was married and they leave behind a surviving spouse, obviously the decedent's income and activities for the point in time during the year that they were alive, their income activity gets, added in with the surviving spouse's activity, and the surviving spouse will file a joint return one last time for that final year. And
what about folks who have an estate that continues to generate income? Do you have to pay taxes on that estate generating income? I'm thinking of a house that might be in the estate and you're getting rental income off of that, and that's going into the estate. Do you have to pay income tax on that income?
Yes, the administrator, executor, again, would be responsible for filing an income tax return for the estate that would report all of the income that occurs during the year of death, basically from the date of death to December 31st. All of that income that would occur through rental activity, investment accounts, interest dividends, or what have you, is required to be reported on an income tax return for the estate.
When is it most likely that you're going to be paying the government for the income?
If the estate holds on to the assets through December 31st and doesn't make any distributions, the estate itself will be responsible for paying the income tax for that calendar year, by the next April 15th. If the estate does make distributions out to beneficiaries during that time period, oftentimes the income and the tax will flow out of the trust and hit the beneficiary's income tax return, and the beneficiary, will be responsible for paying tax on that income.
What about life insurance?
Life insurance, in and of itself, the proceeds are not subject to income tax. The only really tax consequence or issue with life insurance proceeds when one passes away, the total value of the life insurance proceeds is included in the estate, so it gets added in with all the other assets of the estate to determine whether or not the total value of the estate gets to a point where it crosses over the threshold of needing to file another tax return that's not an income tax return. It's referred to as an estate tax return that's more like a balance sheet where you value all the assets. The threshold currently is very high. It's $11.4 million. So we're not seeing quite as many executors having to file estate tax returns as we have in the past, but there are estates obviously of that size that are out there.
What about medical expenses?
Medical expenses get special treatment in the year an individual passes away. Normally, medical expenses have to be both incurred and paid before they can be deductible. But if medical expenses accrue, for the final health care of the decedent, but they aren't paid by the time they pass away, you can still deduct them on the decedent's final individual income tax return. They are subject to what's referred to as a 10% threshold, where the medical expenses have to exceed 10% of the adjusted gross income before they get added in to the itemized deductions. So you do have to deal with that. Or the medical expenses, again, if you have a taxable estate situation where the estate is having to file an estate tax return, the medical expenses could be deducted on the estate return.
But you've still got to pay the bill.
You do. You do. There's no getting around that. And again, that's where good health insurance comes into play.
Right, good health insurance and good advice. So if you want to know more about being an executor or an administrator on someone's estate, get a hold of Pat at TafoyaBarrett.com. I'm Deborah Uroda for It's Your Money.